Single-player games certainly want you to think you're getting better at them, and give you that sense of satisfaction for having come a long way and arriving at the final boss, a powerful warrior, completing the hero's journey, going off into the world again, changed for having gone through it all. But how much of that is real, and how much is the result of the player's power level being artificially increased with in-game damage buffs? If the player started off doing 10 damage to a boss with 200 HP, is it really different when they're doing 10,000 damage to a boss with 200,000 HP? Is it really harder now that they have a double jump and 2 air dashes they didn't have before? In some games, the answer is yes, definitely, dear God, this is hard, and I like those games. That's not always the answer, though. See, the games industry makes the most money when people buy more video games, so they'll always want to influence things in that direction. Besides that, there are other elements of the structure of the industry that also support jumping from game to game instead of grinding one particular game for a long enough time to grow with it as a person. Game reviewers need to get out a lot of game reviews as a part of their jobs. This means they have a limited amount of time to spend playing any one game and immersing themselves in the culture and community of a multiplayer experience, like a competitive Splatoon title, for example, isn't something they can possibly do to the extent that dedicated members will. Reviewers will inevitably become biased towards short, consumable experiences, something you can explore to its fullest extent in the short time a reviewer has to work with the game. Influencers also, streamers, will gravitate toward games that let them get to the central appeal, the core, the heart of them, in a short amount of time. Variety streaming is the most lucrative kind of streaming, because you get to ride the wave of hype and marketing and mass attention on each new game as it releases, instead of needing to wait 5 years for the next game in your franchise to see the numbers liven up again. That's why you see all these massive streaming giants visit our communities for a week or two before vanishing so completely that a lot of us forget they were ever even here. The mainstream audience of gamers is not being conditioned to invest hardcore in any one video game unless that one video game can be perpetually monetized. Think Fortnite Battle Passes, Robux, $500 League of Legends skins, that sort of thing. Otherwise, they're being conditioned to play a game, get its full intended experience in a short amount of time, and for that experience to be satisfying enough that they want to buy another one after the time it takes to make a new one. This approach to gaming is at odds with serious competitive multiplayer experiences, though, so serious competitive multiplayer is a more ambitious, risky thing to try. It's harder for streamers to get into unless the games are all but the most popular games on the planet, because if that game's popularity is going to fade in a few months, for business reasons they need to move on to another title. The biggest names are not going to put in the amount of time investment required to get over the early learning curve and then really integrate into that community, really absorb its culture and become a part of it. Lots of people who only play single-player games go into a game with the expectation that they will be able to succeed, that the game will escort them to a feeling of success. Beating a single-player game is something a single-player game is designed for. Usually when someone doesn't finish a single-player game, it's just that they stopped playing it. It's much more rare that someone doesn't finish a game because the game was too hard and they hit a wall and kept throwing themselves at it and just couldn't get past it. I personally don't want a game to tell me I'm fantastic and clever for doing what every single other player is fully expected to be able to do. It feels patronizing. It feels like marketing. It feels like I'm being manipulated by someone who's trying to convince me to spend money on the next product. I've long been a champion of competitive games on the basis that they do not allow you to remain unchallenged. They're not the only way to challenge yourself. Plenty of art intentionally makes the viewer uncomfortable and demands they question themselves. But competition will always do this. You will either actually be the person you want to be, or you will find out you're not there yet.
Who do you think you are? I am!
You will learn that in real life, nobody starts out being cracked, and they have to work to be cracked. And the fact that you have to work for it only makes it more valuable that you're able to be cracked. It is a transferable skill to work that hard to be cracked. And you'll also learn that it doesn't hurt as much as you thought it would to fail, because you got to see people do some stuff you didn't even know was possible, and now you want to learn to do it, and you probably met some people who will make good practice partners who will become your friends, and you have a place to be now. This is all to say, We're getting a lot of people suddenly touching a Splatoon game that have only been playing single-player games, and they're bringing single-player game mindsets to it. That doesn't mean all of those mindsets are negative. That doesn't mean that I'm trying to condemn every single person that this describes. In fact, I really appreciate that we have so many of those people joining the fold. That's also not to say that there aren't negative mindsets among competitive players. Some people do just play a competitive game to feel like they get to dominate someone else, and I'll call that toxic every day of the week. I've got a whole video on my channel about how I think squid bagging someone in a PvP game of Splatoon makes you a worse player. Some single-player gamers are just hanging out, doing their own thing because they find it fun, they have a happy, fulfilling time in and out of the game, and that's great. I say all this just because it is only with all of this context that I think some of the comments I've been seeing on videos make sense to me. You should play the game the way that's fun for you, not what the meta says. This is a logically contradictory way to think. Some people do have the most fun by figuring out what the meta is and then trying to use that knowledge to get further than anyone else has before. For some people, the goal is to reach the furthest floor down, not necessarily having been the sole architect of the plan to get there, but by whatever means are available. It's been generally agreed upon that just about any build can clear hundreds of floors deep into Bottomless Buffet. Mind you, the first people who were saying that were the people pushing the game early on. So yes, your individual build, if it's more fun for you, will be totally fine for almost any task the game can offer. But for me personally, I'm not as interested in that experience because that means it won't challenge me. It won't force me to make important decisions that can determine success or failure. I'd rather be put in a position where I can fail, where I need to be more resourceful to succeed, because that's when I'll feel rewarded. That's when I feel like I'll have actually learned something and come away having grown in some way. Having this endless difficulty increase is a way to create that. I also find it fascinating to see how the limitations put on players force an evolution of their play, how people learn to adapt to the strictest, most challenging environments. It teaches a lot more about how to respond to challenges elsewhere in life than a situation where your options are carefully crafted by professional artists and designed to work for the challenges you're up against, no matter how thoughtlessly you slap your combination of them together. If you want to be as successful as possible at reaching the furthest floors of Bottomless Buffet, well, there is a single build that has reached furthest, and done so very consistently across multiple players. It's worth at least being aware of and stealing some relevant ideas from. If you don't care about getting the furthest, and only want to test your own ability to theory craft, well, sure, you don't have to take their ideas, but you can at least follow what's going on so you have a benchmark and know whether your build is really performing as well as you think. Furthermore, if you just want to play for fun, and what's fun for you is different than playing for the world record floor, then you don't care about whether there's a metagame or not. You don't get upset when people play Splatoon Raiders differently than you play it, because what you care about is the way to play it that's fun for you. Would you begrudge someone who read books for fun instead of playing Splatoon Raiders? Would you hate someone who's weaving a basket or shooting a basketball right now instead of playing Splatoon Raiders? People can do different things they enjoy than you, and you would still be fine with that. So why would that change at the point that it involves the way that other people play Splatoon Raiders? I don't think that makes sense, except that maybe it feels like the establishment of a strongest strategy is being taken as a condemnation of the cleverness of one's individual build. I'd like to suggest a different way of looking at what the top players of Raiders are building together. It's not the easiest thing to find this community because it's all grassroots, being communicated by certain accounts on Twitter or in certain Discord servers, places you have to find before you can see them, so I think it could do with an introduction. They're a small, dedicated community of people playing the game pretty intensely, sharing knowledge with like-minded people, streaming their runs, and stealing what works while iterating on what doesn't. They're not attached to any particular playstyle or idea about the game, they're just picking whatever will clear the next floor most reliably. This is a group of people that overlaps heavily with competitive Splatoon communities, both in the West and in Japan, and also with overfishing communities, that is, the group of people who really try to push the heck out of Salmon Run. Everyone who plays Raiders has an idea of which gadgets they like and which weapons and weapon powers are strong. That kind of thinking isn't unique to this community of players. What is unique about this community of players is that they're at floor 970 and counting. The difference is that they're taking these ideas and testing them rigorously. They're not assuming their ideas are right, they're testing their hypotheses in the most intense ways possible. You can very clearly see through their actions that their goal is to push the game as far as it can go. In pursuing that goal, they will choose the strategies that are getting them furthest and discard the ones that aren't getting them as far. They're not as personally attached to which solution they use or who comes up with it, so much as whether it works the best or not. Now, some players will have different strategies that work for them, or more commonly, some will see that the more common strategy is working for them, but will try pushing other ideas too, to see, for the benefit of the larger community, if they could maybe work better with some time and practice. At the time that I made the video about the E-Leader build, hitting floor 919 for example, there was a Dynamo player using Dash Bomb instead of Blast Boot all the way up in the 800s. The periphery of these players is a goldmine for information about the game. Even just the people who are watching them secondhand are coming away with new ideas to spread everywhere. They're looking at the builds, running calculations on damage numbers, figuring out scaling. They're passing information down to people who may not be as interested in the pursuit, but are interested in figuring out what works best for themselves. A lot of the time in these kinds of communities, you get people who are labbing out ideas and doing calculations, and they'll feed information to the people who are more interested in executing on the strategy and would rather just learn what that strategy is from someone else. These combinations of people tend to be a pretty powerful engine for progress in the game. At one point I read a guide by Sun, a player who's made it through floor 750, on grinding and weapon drop rates. He stated in that guide that weapon drop rates are completely random and have equal chances. He followed that up by discouraging players from drawing any conclusions to the contrary without hard evidence. A few days later, I found that Taro Taro had tested drop rates for weapons, and over a few thousand trials, he did find that the weapon you play while farming increases the likelihood of finding drops of that specific weapon to a noticeable degree. When I presented that information to Sun, something that contradicted what he'd told everyone, how do you think he responded? "Ooh, let me watch it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna try and test it myself too." It's extremely similar parameters to the side order monochrome palette chip bias. He's excited to learn something that contradicted what he thought. He's grateful to me for showing it to him. He immediately wanted to replicate that result for himself. He started coming up with new hypotheses based on the new information. That's not the mindset of someone whose sense of his own cleverness is offended. It's the mindset of a scientist. This kind of collaboration and rigorous testing of structural self-doubt is exactly how problems get solved elsewhere in the real world. Standards are established, colleagues collaborate, skilled individuals position themselves so they have access to the knowledge and resources they need, people coach each other, and there's an ongoing process of testing, iteration, retesting, and evaluation. In a very real way, every single player that contributed even the slightest suggestion that influenced the evolution of the winning strategy, even just someone who put pressure on the strategy by competing against it, can say they played a part in a world record being broken, and feeling like they're part of something bigger. That's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think someone who doesn't at least see the appeal of that must be failing to understand what's really going on when something like this emerges. I think the existence of a metagame is a beautiful thing, a love letter to the game, and a really accessible opportunity to practice a multitude of valuable skills before having to tackle bigger, scarier problems out in the adult world. Raiders might not get deep enough to hold my interest for as long as competitive multiplayer Splatoon, but the endless gauntlet in the post-game has been engaging to the kinds of folks who like that sort of perpetual challenge for at least a little while, and I've been interested enough to engage with it. I hope that even if it's not something you're interested in yourself, you can at least see why someone else would be, and I can put out videos where I get fewer complaints about the single thing I find the most value in around this video game.